Good day. My name is Fred Valdez. I'm from the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you for being here, and it's my pleasure to present here at the second Culture Symposium of Belize. My topic today has to do with the ancient Maya, what I call the innovative Maya, and I'm going to be talking about some of the developments, some of the adaptations, some of their creative innovations that we still see today. I will start with some of the earliest Maya. Let me see if I can go to a shared screen here. So I'll start with a brief chronology. We have the middle Preclassic, starts at somewhere around 1200, perhaps later 1000 BC or so to about 400 BC. Late Preclassic from 400 BC to 250 CE, and early Classic 250 to 600. That's probably about as far as we'll get today in terms of talking about some of these innovative aspects for the Maya. We know that the Maya area, for example, is southern Mexico and all the way to the Caribbean coast, where Belize is represented here. I'm going to start today with a few items that are actually pre-Maya and see how we can bring those into play in particular. This other map that I'm showing now is just to show where some of the highland areas are, including this portion of southern Belize, which is also very much mountainous and so forth. But the green area represents the lowland regions, and that's more of the focus that I have today. So some of the earliest stone tools that we have once people are conducting horticultural activities include these particular kinds of what we call unifacial tools. These are known from perhaps as early as 3000 or 3400 BC up through 2000 to 1000 BC or so. And they're used for certain kinds of horticultural, agricultural activity, for deforestation, for cropping, and so forth. This is left then or inherited by the Maya. We know these early people were already involved in producing corn, at least an early version of corn, avocado, chili peppers that show up. But the key here is what's known as the Mesoamerican Triad or Mesoamerican Trinity, and that's corn, beans, and squash, which the Maya by 1200 or 1000 BCE are clearly producing in significant amounts, feeding lots of people, providing for permanent settlement, starting to build architecture, and we're going to move into some of these aspects as we go along. Some of those tools on the bottom left there, you see those unifacial or flat-sided tools, eventually some of them becoming bifacial and used for other kinds of activities, still significantly involved in horticulture and so forth, but used for other activities as well. Some of the earliest Maya architecture are simple platforms, these stone-lined buildings that would have supported houses and other areas. In this particular case, you can see what might have been cooking features within that particular building. And they often will have burials to the outside of them with special offerings, such as this, we call this pot-bellied censarium or incense burner. And this particular piece represents and is an example of something that represents long-distance trade, long-distance communication, a shared ideology or belief system, perhaps between quite distant regions. But that becomes another topic for another day. This is just to emphasize that these kinds of things are there. I'm going to focus on certain other aspects. One of the things that happens in this middle Preclassic period is the introduction of certain kinds of crafts and technologies, including shell bead making. These little anthropomorphic bone pieces actually have a hole through them, through the head part of them, and would have been strung onto as a necklace of sorts. So we start to see the beginnings of levels of social status, perhaps as early as the middle Preclassic, and it's clearly in place by the time we get to the late Preclassic. We also have chocolate that's introduced. This is a spouted jar, also known as a chocolate pot, and it was sampled or tested for residues and shown to have chocolate. So we know that the Maya were not only had chocolate, but were using chocolate in some capacity, certainly by 1000 BC. The form of agriculture or horticulture that took place in the earliest times, even before the Maya, was clearing of the area, sort of a deforestation of sorts that already starts by 3,400 or 2000 BC. We have deforestation underway. The Middle Preclassic Maya certainly continue with these activities without hesitation. And this is an example of what takes place. This kind of extensive horticulture means that you're now producing a dependable food crop. You're producing a food crop yourself. You're not counting on what's available from the wild. That means you can afford and you're able to feed more people. That means you can have a larger population. A larger population means a greater labor force. That also then leads to complexity and the need to develop other kinds of social and political institutions. Here we see sort of a little bit of water along the bottom of this slide that represents a canal. These are raised fields, of course, long since abandoned. There's another version with water along the bottom side, and it goes up to this other end, and you see a raised field here in the center that would have been great for growing any kind or any number of tree crops, as well as plants, ornamental foods, and so forth. From LiDAR, we're able to access areas as we see here. This hatchered zone that this cursor is encircling there are raised fields that are hard to get to that we otherwise wouldn't know about just walking through the forest. Here's an aerial view of another area that shows what some of these remnant fields are like. This is intensive agriculture. And these fields are to take water away from the fields, not to bring water to the fields, but to take water away so that during the rainy season, they are better drained and you can get another crop in. So in the late Preclassic, the Maya have come up with this innovative, phenomenal horticultural, agricultural component known as raised fields that allow for extra crops, an extra crop per year. Now you can feed even more people. And it is during this late Preclassic, and from the Middle Preclassic to late Preclassic, we know that the Maya, for example, are incredibly knowledgeable about the plants and the animals in their areas. And those plants and animals also make their way into artwork. But these different strategies, intensive agriculture, the domestic gardens, these are applied to different environments depending on what works best. So the Maya are very much aware of the geography, the geology, as well as the plants and the animals in the area. Here's an example of a cahoon palm, allspice, all of these things that would have been known, the different animals known to the Maya in the past. And these are represented in artwork as well as in form of pottery, etc., from the past. So we know how important these were as part of Maya society. The stone tools and the pottery of the ancient Maya are also quite varied. Here's another example of a chocolate pot. This one's decorated with these incised designs, quite elaborate. We know of workshops that the Maya had in this case, which is all chips of stone, phenomenal in terms of producing millions of stone tools. Here is a blade removed from this core in the center, this blade that has a little residue along the top, and that residue is human blood. Sorry, I didn't go there. And here is the cache or the special deposit that it was within. So there was a blood sacrifice that went along with this dedication of a large building. These are examples of from the earliest stone tools in the lower left to the more elaborate tools of the late Preclassic to the sort of these eccentrics and ritual tools that occur from the late Preclassic into the Classic at large. Architecture also becomes more elaborate. In the late Preclassic, we have monumental architecture, large platforms upon which timber temples were built. Some of these platforms, some of these buildings are highly decorated with incised and or painted decoration. And those timber temples are eventually replaced by masonry temples, as you see here, with these stone buildings at the top rather than a timber temple. And the reason is that the deforestation that began back at 3,400 BC into 2000 BC, into the earliest Maya that continued into the late Preclassic, forced the quality of wood that was necessary for those timber temples, etc. They were much, much further away, much harder to get. The Maya had to come up with some way of continuing to build these structures. Now that Maya society had become so complex by the end of the late Preclassic, how do they build these temples when lumber, when wood is so hard to come by and so forth? And they are innovative enough that they invent the corbelled arch, which allows for these temple buildings of stone above the structures themselves. We have tombs that are introduced, elaborate multi-painted tombs. And from those tombs and other data, such as architecture, pottery, and obsidian, we understand that by the early Classic then, as we move out of that terminal pre-Classic into the early Classic, the Maya are significantly involved with Teotihuacan in central Mexico in terms of trade, exchange, and just interactions in general terms. So in this particular tomb, you see this vessel here at the center, this slab-footed tripod. That's always been known as a Teotihuacan style vessel. Very important, incredibly elaborate. It just reinforces and establishes that there is this kind of communication and interaction taking place. The Maya also had elaborate textiles that we tend to see in pottery, as well as imprints on the tomb, and I'll show that here in a minute. I want to emphasize this one vessel that's over here. You see it on the floor of the tomb. It's there on the right. We'll come back to that momentarily. Here's impressions of textiles that show up on some tomb walls in the mud and plaster of those walls. Tells us a lot about the technologies and what they had available and how much they used for their rulers at the time. This particular vessel, which is called the chocolate pot, for reasons that these medallions on here, these stuccoed medallions or glyphs, indicate that this vessel was made to contain chocolate. And indeed, the residue from within that does show that that is chocolate in the early Classic, but we already know the Maya were using chocolate from way back in the middle Preclassic, as we saw earlier from that spouted jar. The fascinating part technologically about this particular piece has to do with the technology of its construction. It has within the head, the handle, the lid, these nubs, these nobbins that are on the inside. And those fit into this L-shaped groove, right? This L-shaped slot on the rim of this jar. And it slides down, and then you twist the top, and it locks it in place. So the Maya, although this seems like an incredibly simple and obvious kind of technology, the concept and then to put it into action is a phenomenal step forward. And then from here, the Maya become more complex in the late Classic in terms of kingship and political organization. One place, the Lamanai in Belize, in northern Belize, is one of the places that survives the turbulent terminal Classic and survives in its adaptations into the post-Classic. An incredibly important site. Belize is at the heart of some of the most important history of the Maya, particularly late in time. This slide is a photo from our camp looking at the night sky and what the Maya must have seen in the ancient past. So when we look at the Maya of the ancient past, we can say there's a phenomenal amount that they would have seen, that they would have known, and that we have yet to learn. I thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and we will see you soon. Thank you.